Tonight we are going to stay on one road. Not a particular road. Any of them. The one outside your window. The one you take without thinking. The one that goes past the edge of the town and keeps going. Almost nothing on it was there first. The road was. People were laying stone and cutting drains and setting stones at the roadside 2,000 years before there was anything on the road but feet, hooves, and wooden wheels. Everything else arrived afterwards, and most of it arrived embarrassingly late. The traffic light is older than the car. The white line down the middle is younger than the aeroplane. Petrol was sold at the Chemist, in cans, next to the medicine. The wiper was patented by a woman who was a passenger, and nobody bought it for 17 years. And the wheel had been turning under carts for about 5,000 years before anybody thought of putting one under a bag. 14 things, in the order they arrived. Nothing to work out, and nothing to wait for. If you fall asleep before the end, that is fine. The Roman road was built against water, not against traffic. The thing that destroys a road is not weight. It is water. Water gets under the surface, softens what is below it, and then every wheel that passes presses the softness into a hollow. The Romans understood this completely, and almost everything strange about their roads follows from it. They built the road higher than the ground beside it. That raised bank has a name, the Agger, and it exists so that water runs off rather than sits. The surface was curved, high in the middle and lower at the edges. Ditches were cut along both sides to take the water away. Underneath, layers, large stones at the bottom, smaller above, then gravel or fitted paving on top, each layer smaller than the one below it. The famous straightness is a side effect. A straight line is the shortest way between 2 points that a surveyor can lay out with sighting poles. And Roman engineers preferred to climb a hill rather than curve around its foot, because a curve is longer, and longer means more drainage to maintain. The distances were marked, a stone at every Roman mile, 1,000 paces, about 1.5 kilometers. And in the Forum in Rome, Augustus set up a gilded column, the Miliorium Aureum, the golden milestone, from which the distances on all those stones were counted. The roads that still exist are the ones whose drains were kept clear. Where the ditches filled in, the road went. You can stand on a Roman road today in a dozen countries. You are standing on a very old argument about rainwater. House numbers were painted so the army could find men. For most of history, a house had no number. It had a description. The house with the green door, past the well, opposite the baker. In towns, buildings carried signs, a golden lion, 3 keys, a boot. You found somebody by asking. Numbering appears here and there earlier. There are numbers on the Pont Notre Dame in Paris in 1512. But numbering everything, everywhere, systematically, begins in the Habsburg Empire around 1770 by order of Maria Theresa, and it is not done for visitors or for letters. It is done for the military census. Officials went through the towns and villages of the empire painting numbers on houses so that the men living in each one could be counted, listed, and, when needed, conscripted. The numbers were called conscription numbers. In some places, people painted them out again overnight. The system spread, and then it was rearranged for a different reason. In Paris, in 1805, numbering was fixed to the street rather than to the district. Odd on one side, even on the other, counting from the end nearest the river. That is the scheme most of the world uses now. So the number on your door began as a way for a government to find the people inside, and became a way for everybody else too. It is the oldest piece of addressing we have, and it is still just paint or a screwed-on plate, the cheapest thing on the whole building. The road was rebuilt out of stones, small enough to fit in a mouth. By the 1700s, most roads in Britain were mud in winter and dust in summer. Coaches sank. Wheels broke. The usual answer was to lay a foundation of large stones and hope. John Loudon McAdam was a surveyor of roads near Bristol, and his conclusion was the opposite of the usual one. He said the soil underneath will carry any weight you like, as long as it is kept dry. So do not build a great foundation. Build a thin, tight, waterproof crust and drain it. To make the crust hold together, every stone had to be small and angular, so that the pieces locked into each other under pressure instead of rolling apart. His rule for the size became famous: no stone larger than would fit into a man's mouth. Overseers were given a ring gauge, and later a set of scales. A stone over 6 ounces was rejected. Men sat at the roadside all day with small hammers, breaking rock to size. The surface was laid in thin layers and left to be compacted by the traffic itself. No binder, no tar, nothing but broken stone and the shape of the camber, which he kept, because water was still the enemy. Roads built this way were called macadam, and within 20 years they were being built in Europe and America. The method stayed unchanged until the motor car arrived and sucked the dust out of the surface with its tires, which is a different story, and the next one but one. Under the black surface of almost every road you have ever driven on, there is still a layer of small, angular broken stone, doing exactly what he described. Which side of the road you drive on was decided by loads, not by law. There is a story, told very often, that people kept to the left so that a rider's sword hand-faced anyone coming the other way. It is old, it is neat, and there is very little evidence for it. It is worth saying that plainly. What can be traced is duller and more convincing. It has to do with where the driver sat. In Britain, a coachman sat on the vehicle, on the right of the box, to keep his whip arm clear of his passengers. Sitting on the right, he saw the edge of the road best if he kept left. In America and much of Europe, heavy freight was pulled by teams of horses with no driver's seat at all. The driver rode the rearmost horse on the left, so that his right arm was free for the whip. Sitting on the left, he could judge the gap between his wheels and an oncoming wagon's wheels best if he kept right. Britain made keeping left the law in the Highway Act of 1835. France had already gone the other way. The empires carried their habits with them, and that is why the map looks the way it does. Countries have changed sides since. Sweden did it on one morning, the 3rd of September, 1967, at 5 o'clock, after years of preparation. It is remembered as H-Day. Traffic stopped, moved across, and started again. For a while afterwards, there were fewer collisions than before, because everybody was driving carefully and slowly, which tells you something about how much of driving is habit. About a third of the world keeps left today, and the rule is one of the few things on this list that was never invented at all. It was only written down. The traffic light was installed before the motor car existed. In the 1860s, the traffic outside the Houses of Parliament in London was horses, carts, cabs, and pedestrians, and there was a great deal of it. John Peake-Knight was a railway signaling engineer. Railways had already solved the problem of telling one machine to wait while another passes. A semaphore arm by day, a colored gas lamp by night. He proposed doing the same thing on a street. It was put up in December 1868 at the corner of Bridge Street and Great George Street. 2 semaphore arms for daylight, red and green gas lamps for the dark. A policeman stood beside it and worked the arms by hand. It was in service for less than a month. A leak in the gas pipe led to an explosion at the base of the column, and the constable operating it was hurt. The signal was taken away, and nothing like it appeared in Britain again for half a century. The idea came back electrically in America. Cleveland, Ohio in 1914. Red and green electric lamps, wired, on a corner. Amber, the third color, was added in Detroit a few years later, when a police officer named William Potts worked out that drivers needed to be told a change was coming, and not just that it had happened. So the sequence at the end of your street was designed for horses, killed by a gas leak and revived 46 years later for a machine its inventor never saw. The colors themselves are older still. They came off the railways, and the railways took red for danger, because red light carries furthest through fog. The tar on the road began with a barrel that fell off a cart. Macadam roads had one bad habit that nobody minded until cars came. They gave off dust. Iron tires and hooves pressed the stones together. Rubber tires at speed pulled the fine material out of the surface and threw it in the air. Villages on main roads lived in a permanent gray cloud, and the usual treatment was a horse-drawn cart that sprayed water all day in summer. Edgar Purnell Hooley was the county surveyor for Nottinghamshire. In 1901, he was walking on a road near the Denby Ironworks and came to a stretch that had no dust on it at all and was firm underfoot. He asked. A barrel of tar had fallen off a dray there and split, and somebody had shoveled waste slag from the furnaces over the mess to cover it. The tar and the slag together had set into a surface. He went away and worked out how to do that deliberately rather than by accident. Heat the tar, mix it with slag before laying, roll it. He patented it in 1902, and the product was named for the two things in it, tar and macadam. Tarmac. The mixture on modern roads is different. Most of it is now bitumen from oil refining, with grated stone, and the trade calls it asphalt concrete. But the principle he found on a wet road in Derbyshire is the one under your car. Small, locked stones, held by something sticky and black, so the surface stops breathing dust. The road did not become smooth for comfort. It became smooth because the air in the villages was unbreathable. The windscreen wiper was patented in 1903 and nobody bought it. Mary Anderson was visiting New York in the winter. She was riding a streetcar, and it was sleeting. The driver was operating with the front window panes folded open, because a closed window covered in wet snow shows nothing at all, and leaning out into the weather was the only way to see the track. She sketched something on the way home to Alabama. A rubber blade on an arm outside the glass, a spring to hold it against the curve, and a lever inside that the driver could turn with one hand. Turn the lever, the arm sweeps, let go, the spring returns it. The patent was granted in 1903. She offered it to a Canadian firm in 1905 and was told it had no commercial value. She was not wrong about the need. She was early. There were very few cars, and those who had them mostly did not drive in bad weather. By the time closed cars were normal and wipers were fitted as standard, her patent had expired in 1920. She never earned anything from it. The improvement everybody now uses came later and went to court over it. Robert Kearns worked out the intermittent wiper, the pause between sweeps, in the 1960s and spent decades in litigation with the motor industry over who owned it. The wiper is the only control on a car that has not really changed shape in a century. It is a rubber strip on a sprung arm, sweeping an arc exactly as drawn on the way home from a cold day in New York. The white line down the middle came from something spilled. For the first years of motoring the middle of the road was a matter of opinion. Two vehicles met and negotiated. On a wide road, that is fine. On a narrow one at night, in rain, it is not. The Road Commission of Wayne County, Michigan, tells the story like this. Edward Hines was riding behind a milk wagon that was leaking and watched the white trail it left down the road and saw what that trail was doing. It was dividing the road into two halves without anybody saying a word. A center line was painted on River Road in 1911. The account comes from the commission itself, and there is no independent record of the wagon, which is worth saying. There is a second person in this story who is very well documented. June McCarroll was a doctor in the Coachella Valley in California who was run off the road by a lorry that had drifted across. She proposed a painted line, was ignored, and in 1917 went out and painted about 3 kilometers of center line herself by hand. She then spent 7 years persuading the state to adopt it, and in 1924, California did. Lines became a system slowly, a broken line where you may cross, a solid one where you may not, a double line, then colors. The reflective glass beads that make paint glow in headlights came in the 1930s. There is nothing physical about a painted line. It stops nothing and blocks nothing. It is an agreement lying on the ground that almost everybody keeps. Petrol was sold at the Chemist in cans before anyone built a pump. In 1888, Bertha Benz drove one of her husband's machines from Mannheim to Pforzheim, about 100 kilometers, largely to prove it could be done. She ran low on fuel and bought it at a pharmacy in Wiesloch, where it was sold as Ligroin, a cleaning solvent. That was normal for the next 25 years. Petrol was a chemist's line, or a hardware shop's, sold in cans over a counter, poured into the tank through a funnel and a chamois to catch the dirt. The shop chose how much to sell you and what to charge. The first drive-in station is usually dated to the 1st of December, 1913, on Baum Boulevard in Pittsburgh, built by the Gulf Refining Company. A roofed building, set back from the road, with pumps under the canopy, open at night, with a paved area to pull off onto. On the first day, it sold about 30 gallons. It also gave away something with no obvious purpose, a printed road map of the county, free. That was deliberate. Selling fuel required people to have somewhere to go and confidence they could find it, and a map produces both. Free maps went on being handed out at petrol stations for the next 70 years, until the telephone in your pocket replaced them. The station is still the same shape it was in 1913. Set back, canopy, pumps in a row, a small shop with things by the door. Everything about it was designed around one problem. A car must be able to leave the road, stop, and rejoin without blocking anybody. The stop sign was made 8-sided, so it could be read from behind. The first stop signs went up in Detroit around 1915. Black square, white letters. There was no agreement about them at all. Signs varied by city, by state, in shape, color, and wording, and a driver crossing a state line met a new language. In the 1920s, American road officials sat down to make a system, And they made a decision that is unusual and clever. They ranked signs by the number of sides. More sides meant more danger. A round sign, the most sides of all, for a railway crossing, the worst thing you could meet. An octagon, 8 sides, for stop. A diamond for a warning. A rectangle for information. The reasoning was that a driver who could not read the words, or was too far away, or was looking at the back of the sign at night, could still know what it said from its outline. That is why a stop sign is the only 8-sided thing on the road. You can recognize it from the reverse, from a moving car, from 100 meters, in a country whose alphabet you cannot read. The color came later. Stop signs were yellow with black letters for 30 years, because red pigment faded badly, and there was no way to make red glow at night. When reflective sheeting solved that, the sign turned red in 1954. The shape is now in a treaty and is recognized almost everywhere on Earth. It began as a solution to a problem of literacy and distance, not of color. The word motel exists because the sign was too small. By the 1920s, Americans were driving long distances for pleasure, and the arrangements for sleeping were poor. A hotel was in the middle of a town, with a lobby, a porter, and nowhere for a car. The alternative was to pull off the road and camp, which many thousands of people did. Arthur Heinemann was an architect in Pasadena. His idea was a building shaped around the car rather than the guest, a courtyard, rooms opening straight onto it, a garage beside each door, no lobby, no porter, pay and go to your room. Drive up to the bed. It opened in San Luis Obispo in December 1925. He wanted to call it the Milestone Motor Hotel. The sign was not wide enough for the words. So he ran the two together and painted Motelephone with a hyphen, and that is the first use of the word anywhere. The design was copied along every highway in the country, and the word entered the language so completely that it stopped feeling like an abbreviation. It is now in dictionaries in dozens of languages, including some spoken in places where nobody drives very far. The original building stood for about 60 years and was pulled down in 1991. The sign, though, is the ancestor of every motel sign there is, and it exists in that form for the least romantic reason on this list. A sign writer ran out of room. The stud in the road cleans itself when you drive over it. Percy Shaw made and repaired roads near Halifax, in Yorkshire. His problem was driving home at night on unlit roads in fog, and his account of the solution, given years later, is that the tram lines had been taken up on a road he used, and he had lost the shine of the rails that had been guiding him. He also told a story about the eyes of a cat on a fence. That is his telling, and it is the only source for it. What he patented in 1934 is a small, very well-made object. 2 pairs of glass lenses face along the road, set in a rubber pad, in a cast-iron shoe sunk into the surface. Light from a headlamp goes into the lens, hits a mirrored back, and comes out the way it came, straight to the driver. The important part is what happens when a wheel hits it. The rubber pad sinks, and as it sinks, the lens is drawn down past a rubber wiper that scrapes it clean. Rainwater collects in the base and is used for the wiping. Every vehicle that runs over the stud cleans it. That is a maintenance-free reflector on a road nobody visits, in a country with a great deal of rain, and it is why the design survived unchanged. Britain fitted them everywhere during the blackout of the war, when headlights were masked and painted lines were invisible. Shaw's factory in Halifax made them for the rest of his life, and cat's eyes, as they are called, are still made and still work in exactly that way. It is the only thing on this list that gets cleaned by the traffic that wears it out. The seatbelt that everybody uses was given away on purpose. Cars had belts before 1959, and they were poor. A single strap across the lap held you in a crash but folded you over it. A separate diagonal strap over the shoulder needed 2 hands and 2 buckles to fasten, and people did not bother. Nils Bolin was an engineer at Volvo who had come from the aircraft industry, where he had worked on ejection seats, which is a field with a very direct interest in how a body is held. His design put the 2 straps together into one piece anchored at 3 points, with a single buckle low at the hip. The reason it took over the world is that it can be fastened correctly with one hand, in a second without looking, by somebody who does not care. Any design that requires attention is not used. That was the whole of the problem, and he solved it with geometry rather than with instruction. Volvo fitted it as standard in 1959. Then the company did the unusual thing. It made the patent open, so that any other manufacturer could use the design without paying, on the grounds that a safety device is worth more in every car than in one make of car. Every car built since has the same 3-point geometry. The buckle in your hand is a Swedish design from the year the microchip was invented, given away by the company that owned it, and unchanged since. The suitcase waited 5,000 years for its wheel. The wheel is about 5,500 years old. For all but the last 50 of those years, everybody who traveled carried their luggage. There were carts, trolleys, porters, straps, and small folding frames with wheels that you strapped a case to. What there was not, until 1970, was a case with wheels built into it. Bernard Sato was coming back from a holiday, carrying 2 heavy cases through an airport, and saw a worker rolling a heavy machine along on a wheeled skid. He went home, took 4 casters off a wardrobe trolley, screwed them to the bottom of a case, put a strap on the end, and pulled it across the floor. The patent was granted in 1972. Selling it was harder than inventing it. Department store buyers turned it down repeatedly, and the reason they gave was that men carried the bags, and a man would not pull a case behind him on a string. The form everybody uses now came 17 years later. Robert Plath was an airline pilot, and the problem with a 4-wheeled case pulled on a strap is that it wanders and tips. He fitted 2 wheels at one narrow end instead, and a long handle that pulls out of the body of the case, so it travels upright and tracks behind the hand. He made them for his colleagues first. Flight crews walking through terminals with them were the advertisement. This is the last thing on the road, and the only one you take with you when you leave it. Things you carry have a whole episode of their own on this channel. This one is here, because it is the clearest case of the pattern. The wheel was available for 5,000 years, and the need was obvious for 100, and it still had to wait for somebody to look at a machine being rolled across an airport floor. That is 14 of them. They arrived in a strange order. The road was engineered against rainwater before anyone had a use for it beyond marching. The signal came before the car. The number on the door came before the postal service that needed it. The wiper, the line, the belt, and the wheel on the bag all came long after the moment they were obviously needed. And in 3 of those 4 cases, somebody had to give the idea away or paint it themselves to get it used. There is something else they share. Almost nothing here is a machine. A painted line, an 8-sided plate, a piece of rubber on a sprung arm, a strap with 1 buckle, a glass lens that wipes itself, a hyphen in a word on a sign. The road is one of the largest structures our species has built, And the parts of it that do the most work are the smallest and the cheapest. None of them are finished being copied. The octagon is in a treaty. The three-point belt is in every car. The center line is in every country. They spread, not because anybody enforced them, but because they were obvious once somebody had done them once. Outside, the road is doing what it has always done, which is drain water and carry weight, in that order. Sleep well.